Recording in progress.
So for the third time, we're going to be looking at dualism now. And this is the last time, at least from me anyway. So just to let you know that in case you're wondering how long I can milk this cow. But before we do that, let's look at the eclipse. There's the eclipse from last Monday. And Teresa and I got a chance to what?
Where were you?
We were in the Mark Twain National Forest in South Missouri. And we found a recreation site that was wooded and a little pond, a little lake, and it was very pretty. And there was maybe 75 people there altogether, but it wasn't crowded.
Nice.
Wasn't crowded. It was almost the perfect place to see it, and we had great sunshine. So here's the eclipse. You can't really see it well because it's too light in here, but right here is a little bit of a peak. That's a solar flare that you couldn't see until when it eclipsed. That's the solar flare. Although it doesn't show very well here. Other people's photographs show it much better. Maybe because the photography is better than other people. But I wanted to show you this. I thought this was interesting. Here's where we were. This is at 1:54 p.m. And 2 minutes later, it was like that. That was the coolest part, is to have it go black, and stars are out, birds have shut up. It was really great. And it was about 4 minutes of we had totality. And then the most impressive thing was this incredible blast of light. As soon as the moon moved off the sun just a little bit, we got this blast of light, like a powerful thing that just kind of overwhelmed you, and everything went light again. It was pretty cool. And here's us looking at the eclipse. Okay, now he was going, I love eclipses because everybody's looking up, and I'm just got into our stuff. He got into, I don't know, at least half a dozen people. Yeah. He earned his pot belly. I think. Yeah, smart. Okay, so let's go back to dualism now, and we're going to talk about the impact that has on American culture, especially the Gnostic form of it, of dualism. And remember, we talked about Gnosticism 6 weeks ago or whatever it was. And so we're going to look at how that has impact on American culture and has had for a long time. And this is a really big topic, and so we're just going to hit a couple of points. People could probably have written books about this, so we're not going to try to be all-inclusive. But I would welcome any ideas you had about this. So we're going to try to ferret that out. So let's make this general assessment. The farther a religion is from nature, the less likely it's going to be dualistic. Wait, no, I got that backwards. The farther they are from nature, the more likely they are to be dualistic. So if it's a nature kind of connected religion, there's much less dualism. And Christianity is a good example of that. Christianity has always been a religion which has not been very connected to nature, to be honest with you. And as a result of that, it's a highly dualistic. It has evolved to be a highly dualistic thing. Same is true for Judaism and Islam and so forth. So we're talking about religions like animistic, polytheistic, and natural law religions tend not to be dualistic. And I thought, in case you were aware of Dualism, which is a natural law religion, is famous for this dualistic concept of yin and yang, and which they think is balances nature and balances life and so forth. But even in this case, This is a famous symbol that they use to talk about or to illustrate the yin and yang sort of thing. But even in this case, they have a little bit of yin and yang, and a little bit of yang and yin. So even then, they acknowledge that there's a continuum of responses, not a strict dualism. Okay, so I thought I'd point that out. Now, what about Gnosticism? Let's review real briefly because we're going to use a couple of these points in a minute. Remember, an emphasis on personal spiritual knowledge, which is the word gnosis in Greek, which is where Gnosticism gets its name. So personal experience is really strongly emphasized in Gnosticism. That's above and beyond institutional teachings, anything that's orthodox, whatever. So it gives rise to sort of creative forms of religion. That's a very strong characteristic of American religion. Really strong characteristic of American religion that we like very much creative forms of worship, different non-orthodox forms of religion. And they have a distinction between a supreme hidden God of light, who's good, and a malevolent lesser divinity associated with darkness usually. Some Gnostics say that's the Yahweh of the Old Testament, while the God of the New Testament is the good God. But that's a Christian heresy which has been, I think it's called Marcionism, and it has been thoroughly rejected, that there are two different gods, but the Gnostics seem to hold to that. So the supreme God, this good God of light, is responsible for knowledge and spirit. The other, lesser God, is responsible for the material world. Okay, so the physical world that you can touch and, we can see and so forth. That's the realm of the lesser God, who's associated with darkness and is considered to be bad. And then the supreme God of light is associated with knowledge and with spirit. Okay. So that material world, the world we live in here, is considered by Gnostics to be inferior to the world of knowledge and spirit. And again, you access this world through your personal spiritual knowledge. Okay? But the lesser world, the material world, is considered to be flawed and evil. It's the realm of darkness. So we live in the realm of darkness. And we can only get into the realm of light through our spiritual experience and through knowledge. Okay? So Gnosticism is really far removed from nature because nature is considered to be bad. It's the material world. And it's very strongly dualistic. We kind of went through this before. So there's also almost everything in Gnosticism has a duality of principles or forces. So light and dark, good or bad, and they always had moral meanings. One was good and one was bad. So light was good, dark was bad, and so forth. So that sense of moral imperative is important when you're talking about Gnosticism. Now, the reason for spending all this time on a form of religion which was declared a heresy in the 200s, I think it was, and so forth, is because it worked its way into Christianity. And we have strong strains of Gnosticism in Christianity. We talked about all that last time. And it has been a very strong strain in the development of American culture. So we have a large Gnostic sort of foundation to American culture. And some other cultures too, but especially American culture. We caught this harder than most people did. And this is largely because of the influence of conservative forms of religion. American religion has always been very conservative, more conservative than other forms of Christianity in other parts of the world. And as a result of that and the importance that has in people's lives, it's been an important Gnosticism, dualism has been an important part of American culture. So ingrained that a lot of people just assume that's just the way things are. That's just natural, just the way things are. Like an inevitable human trait, you know. We forget that this is all invented. This was all taught to us. It's not something that's inherently in us. Um, because it is not instinctive or inevitable in humans. There are all kinds of cultures in the world which are large, way less dualistic than the United States, way less. And so it's not something that just being a human means you're dualistic. You know, we've been taught to be that way, and we grow up that way, and we are swimming in a sea of dualism, and so we just assume that's normal. We should point out the natural world is, for the most part, not dualistic. This is why those religions closer to nature tend not to be dualistic, because they see in nature that it's not dualistic in nature. Continuums exist virtually throughout nature. There's almost nothing which is not a continuum in nature. A continuum meaning that you have an endpoint and an endpoint and then a whole grade of expression between the two. It's not this or this. It's this, this, and everything in between. And that's what nature does. Even the concept of a species, for example, which seems to be a hard, rigid sort of thing, is not. There's all kinds of ambiguity about what it means to even be a species. So let's look at superheroes and sports. Okay, we'll look at our looking at our American culture. These are two very, very, very popular forms of entertainment in American culture. All superhero stories are dualistic. You have a good guy and a bad guy, right? And they both have supernatural powers, powers which are way beyond human powers. That's the whole point of a superhero movie. You can fly, you can bend metal, you can walk through walls, you can do all kinds of things that, of course, we can't do. And the bad guys have supernatural abilities as well. So they basically function as gods. And one of the reasons we like superhero stories is because it's a form of religion, in a sense. In fact, it's a form of Gnostic religion, in a very real sense, because you have a good guy and a bad guy, and they're fighting for domination, and which is exactly what Gnosticism talked about. Is exactly that. So, and lots of comments here, okay, because we're going to be out there on the periphery here in the weeds.
I don't think it belongs here, but I do want to make a comment about the superhero anti-hero, the Deadpool of the world, that aren't the good guys, the bad guys, but then they're the good guys that might complicate the dualism a little bit.
Might be a little bit, but they're either good or they're bad. In their expression, they're one or the other.
In my mind, Deadpool is not a good person because like he kills a lot of people because that's his thing, but he's a good guy.
But also, all superheroes kill a lot of people. That's just part of what they do, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the point is well taken. It may be that there are some ambiguity in certain forms, but those are not the most typical forms of superhero movies.
Exactly.
Stories.
They're atypical.
They're atypical, but they do exist. Really? I didn't know that. Why don't you tell me these things? It is, and we're going to talk. The next slide is why we adore these kinds of stories. Now, if you want to, this is not something I'd plan to get into, but cultural observers have also noted, though, that attitude that superheroes are these gods that come in and fix everything tends to freeze people and keeps them from making the efforts to fix things. So we get a lot of people who just as soon sit on their fannies and watch a mythical superhero fix things rather than get out and do it themselves. Because we're not superheroes. Only superheroes can fix things. Yeah, right. Yeah, we sometimes. What am I? I'm joking, of course. Of course, I'm joking. So sports are also dualistic. Our team is good. Their team is bad, right? This athlete's good. This athlete's bad. And they have these kinds of things. And especially at the elite level, they function like gods because they're doing things that normal people can't do, right? So we treat our sports figures like gods as well. And so there's sort of a superhero Gnosticism going on there as well. So there's a connection between superheroes and sport and athletes, especially at the elite level. Maybe not so much at the high school level because most of us can perform at close to a high school level sports, but at the elite levels, not so much. Right? So we can make the point these are essentially Gnostic religions. A good guy or a good god or a group of gods, as in a team, and a bad god or gods battle for supremacy by vanquishing each other. That's what Gnosticism is all about. The god of light, the god of darkness, fighting for domination. That's what it's all about. And that's how we have constructed at least a large amount of our popular entertainment. So let's look at that notion. Why are these so popular in the United States? One is people really like dualism. Dualism is the most seductive kind of philosophy maybe in the world. We like this simplistic breakdown of good and evil. It helps structure our lives, helps us know where we're supposed to be. We can be either good or we can be evil. I mean, people choose both. But most people don't want complexity. They don't want complexity in their life. They don't want complexity in the world. They don't want complexity in their entertainment. They want simplicity. These are also frequently redemption stories. Often a superhero starts off misunderstood or, somehow not doing so well and so forth, but emerges as the hero of the day that saves the world. So redemption story. People like redemption stories a lot. Again, there's a religious aspect to redemption. And so this is sort of a religious sort of veneer over all of this. But they're also usually hyper-violent. And Americans have, way more than almost any other culture, has embraced violence in their entertainment. We adore violent entertainment. And these are almost always extremely violent kinds of things. And the sports which are most violent are the ones which are most popular. And the movies, the superhero movies, which need to be violent to be successful. So 8 of the 10 top grossing movies of all time, the 10 most popular movies in terms of receipts of all time, are unusually violent, 80%. 4 of those are superhero movies. Okay? 22 of the top 30 TV broadcasts of all time in the U.S. are football games. One other is a boxing match. So 23 out of the 30 most popular TV broadcasts ever are hyper-violent sports events. So we really like violent entertainment. And football is by far and away the most popular sport in the United States. And with the exception perhaps of boxing, is the most violent sport, common sport in the United States as well. It is a hyper-violent sport, believe me. So let's look at this duality of soul and body. This is a Gnostic idea, and this has a huge impact on the way our popular culture has evolved. The soul was spirit connected to the God of light, right? And the body was material. It's a physical thing. You can hurt yourself. You can touch your body. You can do all that kind of stuff. So that's material. And so it's connected to the divinity of the material world, which is a lesser God, some often portrayed as a corrupt or malevolent God. Okay? So the soul was good, the body was bad in Gnosticism. They had a very strong sort of dichotomy in this respect. Soul good, body bad. And so they strongly rejected the idea that the body was good. And as a result, they rejected the idea of any kind of appropriate form of nakedness. Because nakedness reveals the corrupt material body. You need to hide that with clothes. Okay? So both Islam and Christianity have embraced this soul good, body bad kind of imagery. Primarily from the dualism of Gnosticism, which influenced both of those religions and Judaism as well. Both of these religions have been very modest about dress, assuming that nudity is always associated with sex. The only reason you ever get naked is to have sex. And there's no other way of seeing nakedness. They never see it as an expression of the handiwork or creative energy of God. Never. Now, that would be a logical assumption to make if you accept that people were created by God. God makes good stuff, right? God made nature. Our bodies are natural. Nature is good. Why are our bodies bad? See? And in fact, we have the famous Genesis, 2:25? I think it's the scripture, in which Adam and Eve are naked, and they had no shame and no embarrassment in the Garden of Eden. And only when sin entered the world were they embarrassed with their nakedness. So embarrassment about nakedness is associated with sin in the Bible, at least in the creation story. But there's a lack of consistency here. God created nature, and it's good. God created human bodies, and they're bad. See, so this is a Gnostic, and remember, Gnosticism was a heresy. This is, the kinds of things that meant that it wasn't consistent with a God who doesn't make mistakes, basically. Okay? I am not suggesting that we shall all run around naked. Not at all, and please don't say that I said that or take that away from this discussion. Not in the slightest. I am going to wear clothes always. Well, not when I take a shower. But other than that, yes, always. But I think you all can see that this kind of an attitude has led to some really negative things. Body shaming, for example, cultural, this idea that the body needs to be, okay, nature is seen in Christianity as something which people need to fix. Even though God made it, we've always approached it as something we need to fix and make better, that we can do it better than God, right? And that's why we've modified nature so completely. And the body is part of that as well. And so we have cultural parameters about what a body is supposed to look like. And this has especially impacted girls and women who have had to struggle a lot with this notion of what their bodies are supposed to look like, and have had a long history of having body shaming and so forth. This is all very destructive. And it all comes from the same kind of Gnostic body bad kind of concept. So there are places where we can see that um, we could take this idea and maybe rethink some of our culture, but not running around naked. That's not at all what I'm saying. Okay. But we can see one cultural expression of this in the United States has to do with movie ratings. Movies that show nudity, even non-sexual nudity, are given much stricter ratings than movies which are hyperviolent. And this is a really interesting sort of thing. It's assumed by the movie rating people that violence is normal and that nudity is not. And so nudity is punished. So here's an example. Academic study. Researchers looked at 10 superhero movies released, and this is when the study was conducted, 2015 and 16, and tallied the violent acts by the two good and bad guy, by the good guy and by the bad guy. On the average, the heroes committed 23 acts of violence per hour. That's one every 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes, the good guy was committing an act of violence. And the arch enemies, the bad guys, had 18. So actually, the good guys were more violent than the arch enemies were. Okay. The average film in the study had 102 hand-to-hand combat fights. That's in a 2-hour movie. So every 2 minutes, you're going to have, almost every minute, you're going to have a hand-to-hand combat fight on average. 66 shots fired from lethal weapons, 20 acts of destruction of property, 17 lives lost, and that's just direct lives lost. That doesn't count when the bad guys or the good guys blow up a whole city block, and there must have been 200 people in that block that died. That doesn't even count that. It's only when they actually show somebody dying, And then a large number of examples of bullying and torture. Now, of those 10 movies, all but 2 of them are rated PG-13, with all that violence in there. Here's Captain America killing a guy with his shield. This is just what Captain America does, who has the advantage of not only being a superhero, but being a patriotic American superhero. Now, PG-13 carries a caution to parents that some material may be inappropriate for children under 13. But that means this level of violence is appropriate for non-adults aged 14 to 18. So this is what our children are watching, right? Now, in contrast, a movie which I liked a lot, Asteroid City, by a director which I like a lot, Wes Anderson, which came out last year.
I've seen it. It's different.
See, I like Wes Anderson because he's different. I get so tired of formulaic Hollywood movies, and Wes Anderson is not formulaic.
Jordan literally came into the office. Yeah. Dad, can you watch this? I don't understand.
What did I just watch? That's
And that's why I love Wes Anderson, because he makes you think. He's going for deeper stuff. But anyway, in this movie, one of the actresses steps out of a shower, and for about 1 or 2 seconds, you see her nudity. Not directly, it's reflected in a mirror. And that's it. Now, maybe you'll confirm this since you've seen the movie. There was nothing else in that movie that was remotely R-rated.
Nothing else in that movie that was remotely R-rated, and I don't even remember that particular.
Yeah, because it was very, very brief. But the movie rating scene, they gave it an R automatically because of that 1.5 seconds of nudity. They got an R rating. And there was nothing else in that movie that's close to being R-rated. Now, Wes Anderson, R-rated movies are not as profitable as PG-13s. That's why almost all movies are rated PG-13. Filmmakers know they have to do certain things to get a PG-13 rating because that's the ones people want to see. So that's why almost all movies are PG-13. But he went and appealed the rating, and for the first and only time ever, a film with nudity was re-rated from R to PG-13.
I disagree with you there.
You can disagree with my source, which is right there.
That it was the first time that it could have been changed to run R to a PG-13.
Yeah, it was changed.
Because there are PG-13 movies with nudity.
Right. It depends on the kind of nudity. You can show somebody from behind and get a PG-13. Frontal nudity, not so much.
Titanic was PG-13, and it was the.
Was it really?
I think so. I'll double check that.
Anyway, if I'm wrong, my source is wrong because that's what the words exactly my source said. So
It is the change from the R.
it might be the change from an R to a PG-13.
I can believe change from an R to a PG-13.
I think that's what it was.
Titanic has nudity and it is PG-13.
Okay, there you go.
But it just goes to show Wes Anderson had an absolute point.
Yeah.
Because there was more nudity in Titanic than there was.
Oh, far more. Far more. Okay. So in Europe, non-sexual nudity in films is common. I mean, non-sexual. We're not talking about sex acts. We're talking about just people being naked. You know, way more common in European films. And violence is much, much less common in European films. They just don't do near as much of that. So cultural observers have wondered for a long time about why that's the case. Why are American films obsessed with violence and ashamed, in a sense, of nudity, and why are European films completely different? You know.
And I want to make sure that all of it, there is a difference between American films filmed in Europe
Yeah,
and European films.
that's true. Yeah, we're talking about European directors, European screenwriters, European actors, and European financing.
Yeah.
The financing is the critical issue here. Any American financing is going to be shooting for the PG-13. They always shoot for that. So they distort the movie to make sure you get that.
And there's plenty of American films shot in Europe that are super violent.
Yeah.
But that's because they're American.
They're American, right, exactly. And so they've wondered about this difference, and one suggestion is the United States has a much stronger tradition of this conservative Christianity, which maintains the Gnostic notion that body is inherently bad. Now, the love of violence in the United States is harder to understand, and I thought we'd take a crack at that, which is going to, just a crack at it, and you can weigh in on this. Here's the murder rates for countries in the world as of now. U.S. 6.81 per 100,000 people. Compared to the following countries in Europe, look at that. Russia and us are almost exactly the same. So we are proud to have a murder rate the same as Russia's. But Russia, by far and away, is the largest murder rate in Europe by a long margin. And most European countries, and this is just a few of them, are much, 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 much less. And by the time you get down to Switzerland, you're talking about something which is like, our murder rate is like 25 times greater than Switzerland's. Same for the Mideast, Afghanistan, 4.02, Israel, Morocco, Palestine, 1.4, Jordan, Oman, way, way less. Africa, Zimbabwe about the same as us, Kenya, Ghana. Some in Africa are higher, but you've got a lot of African countries are lower than us. Asia, Mongolia, similar to us, but these countries way lower. Japan, 0.23, that's the lowest in the world. That's 30 times, ours is 30 times more higher murder rate than Japan's. There's something going on here. I mean, this is a cultural thing, right? The exception is Middle America. Middle America has gone crazy on violence. And the reason why is because of their history. They, real briefly, because they haven't always been that way. I mean, I've traveled a lot in Middle America, and they have not always been that way. But there were Middle America was the point of contention between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 80s and 90s. That's where the Cold War was being fought out. Literally fought out. And we just poured weapons into Middle America. I mean, just unbelievable amounts of weapons. And everybody was armed to the teeth. And what's happened is those weapons are still there. and they're in the hands of gangs, and the gangs are trying to basically take over the countries. And so they are killing everybody in sight. They have all of our weapons, which we've left there, from the Cold War era. And this is why we're having so many immigrants from Central America, Hondurans and El Salvadorians and Nicaraguans and Guatemalans, because they're trying to get away from the hyper violence that's going on. It's extreme at this point, really, really bad. But there's a historical reason for that, and it comes down to the Cold War. So what are some of the suggestions? And this is where we can have a discussion here. What are some of the suggestions for why the United States is so violent? Okay, this is what people have said, okay? Number one, we Europeans settled North America. There were millions of indigenous people here already. We got rid of them by killing them, basically, and by forcing them off. So the dominant culture of the United States, the European culture of the United States, was established through acts of rather extreme violence against Native Americans. So that's a good thing, because we got our culture established. And so it was kind of woven into the very beginnings of our culture that violence solves problems, or creates good situations. Same is true for slavery. The development of the United States was absolutely dependent on slavery and racism. And they are both inherently violent. And so again, we saw something which was inherently violent, which gave us what we wanted. What we got out of the deal was the development of the United States and wealth and land and things like that. The U.S. has an intense passion for guns. This is something which is a whole another topic. We could spend a lot of time on this. But at the present time, there are way more guns in the United States than there are people. Way more guns than there are people. We just have this incredible, and almost nobody else in the world has that passion. Certainly not Europe, the countries which are most like us. And that's been the primary instrument of violence in the United States history, and people adore guns, and so they adore the violence that goes with that, or at least it's a possible connection. Other people have pointed out the fact that we've developed a warped sense of individual personal freedom, which leads to hyper-individualism and a focus on our personal desires, our wants, what we want, what I want. This is what I get, and we have taken the notion of freedom and made it intensely individualistic and personal, not community. And there's a big difference between community freedom and individual freedom. And we don't go for community freedom very much. We go for individual freedom, and especially a warped version of it, which basically says nobody can tell me what to do. Nobody. That's an American trait. Given other cultural forces, violence is often justified in the minds of some people to obtain those desires and wants. Okay? And then finally, the development of the idea that entertainment that isn't violent is boring. We associate violence and entertainment with excitement. And the last thing in the world you want is to have anything boring. So it put a lot of violence in there. One study recently showed that 70% of all American films feature guns, and almost always in a positive way. In other words, in the script, guns solve problems. And so this is what we like because we find it exciting and interesting. For all of these reasons, we want our popular culture to be that way. And of course, since we take a lot of our cues about how to live from popular culture, when we see hyper-violent popular culture, it tends to make a hyper-violent culture otherwise, individual lives. So what about, that's nudity and violence. What about gender? There's another way of looking at dualism here. We have traditionally had a very rigid understanding of gender. Okay? dualism of male and female are the only possibilities. You're either male or you're female, period, no other discussion, right? We've created out of this characteristics which are define what men are supposed to be like and what women are supposed to be like. What's supposed to be like, you know. And those that didn't meet that list of characteristics for men and for women were considered suspect. And I don't know what it's like to be a girl growing up. I really don't. But as a boy in high school, it was frightening. In my culture, it was frightening because you were constantly worried about your expressing manliness and wondering if what you were doing was manly because you had to hit that list. And the penalty for not hitting that list was severe. You got really, really ostracized. And so you were constantly worried about hitting. I assume it's the same for girls. I certainly don't have that experience, though. Because people who didn't meet those characteristics are suspect and marginalized. So what that means is that in American culture, and probably other cultures too, but certainly in American culture, men and women traditionally have had to prove their gender. They've had to earn their gender by expressing themselves in certain ways, according to the list, of what are men things and what are women things. And there's very little crossover. Among other things, this has created the so-called battle of the sexes. We're supposed to just be at each other's throats all the time, culturally, which never made sense to me. But nevertheless, that's how we often see that. It's a power thing, and which evolves out of that, because part of the list for men is to be powerful. That's on the list. You can't show emotions. You can't weep. You have to be strong. You have to be in control. That's all on the list for boys, for men. So it's part of this list in a sense. And of course, women have suffered by being denied power and by being, forced or expected to conform to a certain list. But you had to earn your gender, okay, traditionally. This is so ingrained in American culture that the majority of people may still assume that it's the natural order of things. There's only two genders. There's only male and female, period. That's all there is. They would assume that nature itself only provides for two genders, male and female. Those that believe this are at the core of marginalizing gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans people. Because gender is not dualistic. It never has been. It's not in nature. It is certainly not in nature. There's huge amounts of examples in nature of multiple gendered animals, in a sense, that don't behave according to a strict dualistic dichotomy. And it's certainly not true in humans. And it never has been. And of course, a lot of harm has been done by trying to force people to be in one side or the other, who are not one side or the other. There is a continuum, and there's people on that continuum. And their lives are often horrible because of what society forces them to do. And we're seeing a resurgence of that even now.
I do think there's certainly, there certainly is the numerical innovation. I do think there is becoming more accessible.
I think there is now, yeah, I agree.
And people being willing to come out, right, and to be open about, where they are. But we certainly, there's pushback.
There's huge pushback. And
huge pushback that I think now, but I do think that there are more people that are at least willing to come out as.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's changed in the last 5 or 10 years. It's been the real change. Although it has roots in some heroic people who went before that, but it's only recently. Um, but people who absolutely are marginalizing people who aren't male or female um, are saying, look, they're just making it up. Look at all these people who are saying now that I'm gay or I'm trans or I'm whatever. And the point is, there's always been those people, and they just couldn't say it because they were going to be crushed. And now they can say it, and they're starting to say it. And just that many people, yeah. Right, right. You can just be. And there's no doubt this is true now, but at the same time, there's been a really strong reaction against that because of the dualism. Yeah, yeah. Just for example, a lot of Native American nations, by the way, Native American religion is all animistic, all very closely related to nature, and they understand continuums. They understand them really well. Um, but Native American nations, a lot of them have more fluid understanding of gender. The Dene, the Navajo, have 5 genders they recognize, for example. Um, so and that's just one example, but they have 5 genders that they recognize. Um, the Dene, as well as the Cheyenne and a lot of other Native American nations, honored people, we'll say of alternative genders, of non-dualistic genders, believing that they were more complete human beings because they had elements of both men and women. Kind of makes sense that they'd be more complete, and they often were counselors and often had positions of authority and respect within the tribes. Oops, there we go. Now, I just thought we'd look at this list. We could probably talk for hours about this list. But these are just the way our society is set up is so dualistic, right? We have either this or this, and we don't tend to let things go in between. Democracy and authoritarianism, for example. Truth is, we're not a democracy. According to the rankings, there's people who rank countries based on how democratic they are. We are less democratic than any of the democracies of Europe. So, and there's reasons for that. We are way down the list. I think 36th now in the world in terms of democracy, something like that. So we are actually in between. And as you can see right now in American politics, we are certainly drifting towards authoritarianism. It's definitely there. It is definitely moving that direction. And that's why this election is so critical. We're going to see where we're at in November. Are we going to make a choice for democracy or authoritarianism? And that's part of the choice we're going to make. And where are we going to be in that whole thing? Capitalism and socialism is a great one. And we adore capitalism in the United States. It is who we are. And anything which does not hold to rigid understandings of capitalism is immediately called communism. As, or socialism. It's not. There's all kinds of a continuum of economic activity between capitalism and socialism. All kinds of it. You know, and in fact, again, we're not capitalistic. I mean, Social Security is not a capitalistic idea. Most people think it's a good idea, but it's not a capitalistic one. You know, so we have all kinds of non-capitalistic things. We are on the continuum already. It's just that we don't want to say that. We want to believe that we're capitalistic, period. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it depends on whether you treasure individual concentration of wealth or if you treasure a society where everybody's taken care of. You know, we treasure individual concentration of wealth. That's what we do. And so that we err on that side. A lot of European countries want to, I mean, Sweden for a long time. I had a professor who went to Sweden to do research and he took his family with him. He was there a week. He was going to be there for like 12 months or something like that for a while. He was there a week and he got a check in the mail from the government. And he went, what is this? And he asked somebody, he said, in Sweden, the attitude is there will not be a single hungry child in the entire country. So every family that has children gets a check every week from the government to make sure they have food. Can you imagine that flying in the United States?
It did briefly.
Every family got a check?
COVID.
Well, yeah, but that
And it did help.
and it helped child poverty a lot,
A lot.
a lot. But of course, that was one of the reasons why people hated COVID, or hated the government's response to COVID, and they got rid of it as soon as they could. Yeah, even though they seemed to help. What about Democrat versus Republican? You know, you've got to be one or the other. You cannot be anything else in our country. The No Labels group just announced they have given up trying to find anybody who's going to run for their on their party for president because nobody will do it. Nobody. Not that I'm in favor of no labels. I'm just saying they position themselves as on the continuum, and they just are crashed and burned. White, black, religious, atheistic. Certainly, there's a continuum there. Between the environment, preservation of the environment, and economic progress, it's got to be one or the other. So anytime in the United States history when we put aside land for a national park, somebody screams because holy cow, now we can't make money off that land. You know, it's one or the other. Wilderness versus the human-built world. Boy, there's a strong continuum there. You talked about male and female, urban and rural. Who knows what urban and rural means anymore? Who knows? Only 19% of all the people in the United States today are classified as rural. Only 19%. 81% are classified as urban. But a lot of those urban people are living in suburbs. Suburban. What does that mean? You know, and you've got all kinds of continuums there. Us and them, you know, good guys, bad guys. We're us, we don't like them because they're weird. You can probably think of other. This is just a random sort of list that I came up with in you know a minute and a half. Mhm. And by the way, football, almost all the terminology of football are military terminologies, which is battle. It's a war. War is its metaphor, absolutely. So it does lead to that. But you've got shotguns and the trenches, and you've got all these kinds of terms that you use, which are military terms. And there's more. We could do all kinds of things here. But all of these are invested with cultural meaning. One is good and one is bad, right? So Democrats are good, Republicans are bad, or Republicans are good, Democrats are bad. That's just the way it is. And um, losing the continuum means you can harden your position. You can say that I'm part of the good group, whichever group you are part of, and they're part of the bad group. And there's no overlap, there's no talking, there's no connection. And it leads to moral absolutes, which makes compromise almost impossible. But there is a continuum in all of these, plus probably any other dualistic thing you can think of, but there's continuums in all of that. And there are people in the middle there. There are people who are living in the middle of there. And that failure to recognize that continuum hardens people's sense of identity. And we're seeing this happening more and more in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Really hardening their sense of identity and refusing to consider any other possibility except exactly what you know and what you believe. And we have our world that we have today as a result. And that can cause a lot of pain for people who are on the continuum, who don't, buy into that rigid identity. Final thing, I'm going to be right on time. Is this amazing or what? What if, we made the point there's lots of Gnostic influence in the United States. What if it was overtly introduced today? Overtly, like Gnosticism as a religious idea. I think it might be really popular because so many people buy into what we're talking about. This trendy statement, I'm spiritual, not religious. That is Gnostic to the core. Remember, Gnostics are all about personal spiritual enlightenment and not the institution, not church, not all that kind of stuff. So that's a Gnostic expression if there ever was one. And lots of people say that. But this nobody can tell me what to do mentality, this distorted view of individual personal freedom, that is currently being manifest in a rejection of institutions, all institutions, government, schools, education, churches, everything is being rejected by huge numbers of people. Exactly what the Gnostics would do. Exactly. They don't like institutions. They like individual thought. So a rejection of group freedom for the group as opposed to individual freedom, would make sense to Gnostics. But I want to leave you with this. It's contrary to the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of Jesus is all about one thing: community freedom. Freedom to be whole people in the whole community. Everything in Christianity is community. Everything is. Everything that Jesus did, anyway, is community. Which is why Gnosticism was banned as heresy.
And oh yeah, this is like community of Christ, right?
We're community of Christ.
We are countercultural.
Yeah.
And it's the uphill battle that we're facing even more.
And that's why we can't get people to join our church. And that's why evangelicals get people by the truckload. Because they're all about individual expressions of religion. Evangelicals are all about my personal salvation. That's individualism. That's me wanting to be okay in the hereafter. And it doesn't stop there.
I would argue a little bit with that, Rich. Even constructively. Even I think evangelicals are fighting with the Gnostic on spiritual but not religious. Like even they're starting to see because
They are starting to see that. You're right, because that leads to. Here I am trying to not be judgmental, but that leads to interesting forms of religious expression.
one of the things for me that sticks out in Jesus' teachings is even, and it's related not to this slide, but to the last slide, right? Everything is on a continuum. That Jesus, even in his teachings, wasn't against a particular group of people. He was against hypocrisy, saying one thing and doing another. But he still engaged with everybody.
With everybody, yeah, exactly.
He engaged, like you wouldn't have these fun discourses between him and the Sadducees and the Pharisees if he wasn't ready to talk to the Sadducees.
Right.
Right? You wouldn't even have had that kind of discussion. And what has happened in our culture, in my opinion, is that we have gotten so far apart and we no longer talk with the other.
Exactly.
That we have accomplished the American dichotomy, and now we have a group that does not talk to the other, and we don't have to. We don't have to. We don't have to interact with everybody anymore. We don't have to hear the same news stories. We don't have to hear the same conversations, except in the occasional community environment. Sometimes even at church, although that's less and less. But I think if we were to look at Jesus' example, is we still need to engage with folks that we disagree with because that's how we become in the middle of the continuum.
Absolutely, and that's the community aspect of it. Yeah. That's getting outside the individual and reaching out into the community. Like I say, everything in Christianity, according to Jesus, is community, other people. You know, and yet we have Christian nationalism growing and growing and growing, which is a hyper individualistic and very rigid, sort of dualistic view of how our country's supposed to be.
That we still need to engage with.
Which we still need to engage with, but I'm just saying from their perspective.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest struggle, right? How do we counter that? I mean, that's what I have to do.
Yeah.
How do you begin to counter that? And part of that is the bridge building.
Well,
still, like, as a whole, you look, where are we going to, how do we
and this is complicated by the fact that we're living in a world now where people don't believe there's such a thing as truth.
Yeah.
And authentic expression. They don't believe that exists. And if there's no truth, there's no way of having a yardstick to see where you are. Everything's okay then. Everything's okay. Truth is, everything's not okay. And there's no trust.
And it's because of what you've been exposed to, what you've listened to, what you've heard, that's all reinforcing
Right.
on itself.
Because you're not outside your own end of the dualistic thing. You're not in the continuum. You're here.
And yeah. That's all you hear about. That's all that you listen to. That's all that your friends talk about. It's just the stuff in your own section, echo chamber. And unfortunately, this is soapboxy, so I apologize. But no longer are there's no more moderate voices because people can choose the voices they want to listen to. I don't have to watch the Walter Cronkite because there's only 3 channels available. I can listen to the super ultra whatever I want, either on the left or right, and ignore the other side.
Yeah.
I don't have to listen to any logical statements that challenge my beliefs. I don't have to. I can just ignore them. Anyway.
We're probably out of time. Exactly. That's the Christian thing. See God in everybody. And what is God? 1 Corinthians 4:8. God is love. I did pointing at you. That sorry.
I don't have 1 Corinthians 4:8 memorized.
I just wrote a sermon on it. So there you go. So you got to see God in everybody, see the love in everybody. So that's what Christians are called to do. That's our job.
That's the good news.
That's good news. But we're out of time now. We're over time, and so thank you for your patience and for your response.
You're amongst friends, Rich.
Yeah.
Well, and I will tell you that Hannah and Jordan, I don't know if Matt told you that,
I didn't.